That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Ctrl Create, AI for Creatives, a special 5-part pulse check mini-series from Enrollify and Element 451. I'm Dave Hunt, Executive Creative Director and longtime higher ed marketer. In this series, I'm sitting down with leaders and creative leads who are partnering with AI to scale ideas, streamline workflows, and push their work further without losing their voice. You'll get behind-the-scenes stories and practical playbooks to help you turn AI into your newest collaborator, not your competition. Whether you're leading strategy or hands-on in the work, our goal is to give you the tools and inspiration to unlock new possibilities with AI. Let's dive in. My guest today is Matt Owens. He's the co-founder and chief design and innovation officer at Athletics, the Brooklyn brand studio behind work for Google, Major League Soccer, and Amazon. Matt's a published thought leader and author of the book A Visible Distance, Craft Creativity and the Business of Design. And he's a 25-year champion of demystifying new tools and design from the early days of Flash to today's advances with AI. Matt, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for our conversation. And I thought up first, could you give us a snapshot of Athletics and your work there and talk a little bit about how you've preserved the maker culture even as your studio has grown to over 30 people?
We started about 2 decades ago, roughly. It was very much a small group of founding partners, 2 of which are still with us, Jason and myself. And we both came out of design and brand, and we're really, we both worked for larger agencies and smaller agencies and decided to sort of join forces. And I think when we started, we just wanted to place a studio to create great work and to team up with people that we wanted to. And I think what I had learned about running a small agency prior to that was that you need some kind of infrastructure, right? You need a little bit of, you need a studio space, you need a name, you need a place for people to go and something to talk to. And I think Athletics as a creative collective was really fun. It was almost like pre-co-working space vibe. And the reason we're called Athletics is our first studio was in an old boxing gym. And I think what happened is over the course of 5 or 10 years, we grew the business and it just became, out of necessity, more formality. And then I would say around 2010, 2011, when Malcolm Buick came, he had left Wolf Owens, which is a much larger agency than ours, and had decided to sort of come work with us. He brought in a great deal of that kind of Wolf Owens brand DNA. So much more of brand systems thinking. And I think for us, it was that kind of perfect marriage, homegrown, DIY, do-it-yourself sort of maker culture, and then the sort of larger brand systems thinking that Malcolm brought to the table. And I think that helped us always kind of maintain a bit of, I would say, professional rigor coupled with what I would call like a sort of humanist making, and it's like, I think that's what makes us unique. And I think we always want to see our work out in the world. We just don't want to make things that are great systems that are hard to decipher or so large that people can't deploy them. And I think in the age of AI and in the age of sort of, new kinds of progressive systems thinking where, you have APIs and all this kind of stuff, the maker culture really shines through because people want to, the speed to market so much quicker.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I would encourage anyone to check out the Athletics website. We'll have a link in the show notes. But you all have been doing such beautiful and amazing work for I know, a long time. So I think one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk with you is because of your agencies or your studio's embrace of AI and new tools. And one of the things that you've said is that agencies must interrogate those new tools preemptively rather than reactively. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that preemptive interrogation looks like at Athletics and for you personally.
Well, I've always been super, super curious. And I think over the last 10 or 15 years, what I've discovered is that all the tools are becoming, the barrier to entry is lower, right? I mean, if you try to fire up Stable Diffusion, for example, and mess around with it, it can be a little challenging, but like from After Effects to Runway to whatever you want to look at, I think at least in the last 15 years, my philosophy is that to go from not knowing anything to I made something, might be terrible. Like you can do that pretty much with anything in a weekend if you put your mind to it. And I think having been sort of an owner operator kind of guy for so long, I had no choice but to learn things. And then as we've grown our agency and now we're 30 folks, what is used to come from within is still within me, right? Hey, I'm really interested in this. I'm going to check it out. You have to try to figure out, build systems and processes that people that don't necessarily, their brains aren't wired like that, to give them space to learn. And so for us, we definitely, we'll take off a handful of Fridays and just have complete exploration days where people are like, hey, log in, learn whatever you want. Project managers might be like, oh, I really want to get into Gemini for the day, or a designer might want to learn something that's video based. So trying to leave those spaces formally within the agency so that you're like, okay, we're going to carve out a day for this. And what that does is it brings people all together and says like, we're doing this on a day, and it's a formal exercise. But those are also coupled with the day-to-day incremental work, like encouraging people. We have Slack channels that, where you're encouraged to share your thinking. We have a whole Slack channel just dedicated to AI tools. And so I think it's a series or a suite of exercises, behaviors, attitudes, some of which are formal and some of which are informal, that gets everybody to kind of come along for the ride. And I think that's what I would refer to as proactive, meaning you get all of the different, everyone's mindset slightly different, right? A creative might be infinitely curious. A project manager might just want to learn specific tools. And so what we're trying to do is, studio wide, bring that kind of curiosity up and build moments within formal and informal moments to be able to foster that. If that makes sense.
That's really cool. I'm curious, has it been like that from the beginning when generative AI first started taking off with that intentionality, or is that something that's evolved over the past couple of years as, it's become sort of this undeniable thing that you have to do something about?
Well, yeah, I mean, I jumped on like Mid-Journey, like in January of 2023. So what is that? It's over 2 years ago. And I was pretty early on. Like I was like, oh, I'm a big fan of demystification. So I was like, we got to check this out. And then I would say within our studio practice, there's our head of technology, Ross Luby, is very, very forward thinking when it comes to technology. So, and then Jameson Proctor as our CEO, he also is very into it. So I would say that, within our business, there were less than a half a dozen people that are like, we're jumping into this voluntarily. We're excited by it. Yeah. And I think that curiosity has always been there. I think when you're a small studio of say like 10, that's just native. You're wearing multiple hats. I think once you grow to 30 and above, when you have an org chart and you have job descriptions and structure, they're just, that kind of organic curiosity needs to be fostered a little bit more deliberately. I think we've always had that. What I think occurred is probably within the last year, what we've seen is that we've gone from novelty to much more of a maturity of AI tools. So for example, GPT-4 is a day-to-day companion for my work, right? It's not like, it's not a nice to have, it's just there. I use it. It's normalized. And then I would just say that that's what we're seeing now is we're seeing over the last like 9 months, more of a normalization of certain tools, and then more of a design. And especially now that we have, AI agents and integrations that didn't happen before, now people are getting more deliberate. Like, what is the problem we can solve with these tools, and what could we replace, or how could we augment our workflows? So I think it's become more deliberate now that the tools are a little bit more mature.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned ChatGPT. Are there any other tools that have fully moved to a point where you would consider them everyday utility in athletics?
I mean, I would say, Gemini, it's as common. What happened in our studio is we had early adopters that would get their own accounts or get really excited. And then over time, we decided to say like, okay, as an agency, we're small, we're not that big, but we need to invest in specific tools. So we
Mhm.
basically had an AI audit day where leadership went through and asked every individual person, what are they using? What would they want to use? And then we sort of picked a few lanes. And Google's been a long-term client off and on for many, many years. And I think, Gemini is not going anywhere. And a handful of folks in our studio are like really, really into it and are like super users. For me, I got into ChatGPT pretty early. And so it's sort of like the way the joke I make, it's like a Google Meet versus like a Zoom person. It's like, well,
Mm.
I'm a
Yeah.
GPT guy. And so
Right.
I think there's a little bit of that going on. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I
Yeah.
think we're still a little bit in the try it before you buy it moment where we're still trying to keep our cast the nets, because what's going to happen is there's going to be a few big players, right? We've been huge Notion users for many, many years, and Notion has AI capabilities for, transcription and all kinds of things. So I don't think it's about just picking one lane. I think it's about, you don't want to spend a ton of money, but you want to invest deeply in a handful of tools to really start to really I think it's the behavior normalization aspect that you really want to focus on.
Yeah. I'm curious if I guess there's a couple ways that we could ask this. If there's a specific tool that you would think if a creative team is behind on adopting AI, where they would start for the first, kind of biggest impact, or maybe it's the same answer, but what's the one tool that you would really not want to let go of at this point?
Oh, I love them all, but what I would say is the way my thinking works is that embrace AI and the tools that are already normalized in your business. So, for
Hmm.
example, all of us use Figma intimately, right? It is a
Hmm.
thesis foundational piece of software that we do our day-to-day work in. So within Figma, all of the new features we're like, you guys got to get into them because it's a thesis program, right? For our tool Sesame.design,
Hmm.
we integrated Firefly, and it's like, well, why did we integrate Firefly? Well, it's like Adobe Creative Suite's not going anywhere, right? And it's like, I think if you have an organization that's a little gun shy or doesn't really know where they want to start, I think it's starting
Hmm.
with the tools that are already normalized, because it's an easy path. It's an easy path. So yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers the question. And then the other aspect of it, which I think we think a lot about too, is we look at our workflows and we look at the AI tools that are starting to like replace those workflows, right? So for
Hmm.
example, like I'm really into Reloom. I don't know if you heard Reloom, but it's like Reloom is basically, you can make us, when we do digital work that requires a sitemap, you can go from sitemap and just toggle right to wireframes. And then that can be exported into Webflow. And it's like, and it has AI tools to like make recommendations around like type link and then all kinds of stuff like that. And it's so, the two pieces are like, hey, go with the tools you already use, learn the AI capabilities, those have already been released, and then find those gaps in your workflow where you're like, we should definitely get on board with this because the industry is fundamentally changing. And then I would say,
Yeah.
lastly, there's the novelty, right? It's like, I
Hmm.
love Runway, right? Runway is
Yeah.
so fun. You can upres images. I do tons and tons of really fun, still image to video. And, some of that gets worked into brand world sometimes. We'll try to make things use AI to make things move so that's just a little easier. Not always, because the goal is to make it sort of indistinguishable, right? There, when you
Hmm.
use AI imagery, that often feels like AI imagery. So we try to kind of do things so that it feels indistinguishable. And so I would say
Hmm.
that third pillar, right? If it's the normalization of the tools that you already use, find the gaps of the workflows you know are going to change. And then the third would be like, what's the novelty that's going to get our team excited, right? Like
Yeah.
I think the video side of things is so cool and awesome.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work to, once you get into it, you're like, okay, well, how many hours am I going to do this it's get excited about it and arrive at nothing, but like get a little bit further in my knowledge, right? So that's something
Right.
you got to invest in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking like this past week there was I think it's the first commercial that was created entirely with AI with Google's new video stuff, but they were talking
Yeah,
about how, yes, the scale of it, you're doing a full commercial in just a couple days for a fraction of the cost, but you're also generating 8-second clips at a time and doing hundreds of generations. And so there's still a lot of experimentation that has to happen to make that stuff come together for sure.
totally. That I mean, it's not a falsehood, but the misconception is like, oh, AI is going to make my life really fast, or it's gonna be a shortcut. It's like that's not true. It's like you're basically just trading one behavior for another, and
Hmm.
in theory, with LLMs and everything, that new behavior, you have more data behind it and more power, right? And so
Right.
I think the mindset we need to shift from is it's not about like, let me automate this stuff so I can go like watch TV or something. It's not about that. It's sort of more like going from horse and buggy to a car. It's like, oh, this is a new way
Yeah.
of getting somewhere, right? And it
Yeah,
just requires new behaviors fundamentally.
absolutely. So higher ed is often perceived as a sector that's slow to adapt and change. And I know there are some entrenched pockets of resistance to AI among higher ed creatives. I'm curious what you see on the studio side and among other agencies. An embedded internal team at a university might be able to drag their feet a little bit, but athletics seems like they're on the forefront with your leadership and everything that's going on there and the culture that you have. But is there resistance that you're seeing in the industry to generative AI, or is it just this thing that we have to, everybody's kind of coming to terms with now?
At least for me, what I'm seeing is falls into two buckets. One is cultural, and then one
Hmm.
is scale. So what happens at the cultural level? So there's just certain demographics and sensibilities that want IRL, they want authenticity,
Yeah.
and like look at TikTok, right? It's like I
Right.
think we're probably moving towards a moment where TikTok's going to really embrace AI generated content,
Hmm.
but right now, the cultural behavior within TikTok is like it's all about sort of like DIY,
Hmm.
homespun, IRL, right? And then you're going to see that within agency practice too, right?
Hmm.
There's when AI becomes normalized and it's sort of everywhere and it proliferates, then the things that's going to stand out are the ones that are what I would refer to as practical effects, like the people that
Hmm.
are using the things in smart ways. So I would say that's a cultural difference, and then I would say
Yeah.
it's a scale difference. So within academia or within large agencies, what ends up happening is the bigger the organization, the more rigor around privacy, software purchases, the
Right.
cost implications of software adoption. And so I think it's just what you see when you deal with big organizations is that the slow moving nature of it isn't necessarily a byproduct of curiosity. It's just more a byproduct of the financial investment. I think that's where cautious optimism is really good because you
Yeah.
should invest in it and you should get excited about it. I think what we do, even at our small size, like we can't invest in 25 tools all at once and pay all the
Right.
monthly fees for 30 people. So
Yeah.
I think what it is it's individual curiosity, and it's coupled with like trying to figure out how you do these moments of opportunity for people to experiment and learn those new behaviors, right? So I do feel very strongly that what will end up happening is AI will become like any other tool. Like we'll see a lot of it. But I think the thing I'm most excited about, and this is more on the visual design side of things,
Sure.
is I'm really excited when it starts to become somewhat indistinguishable and starts to become blended with all the IRL stuff. I'm also really excited when the pendulum swings back to like any innovation. It's like people we'll get over inundated with AI, and then
Yeah.
you'll have this people that are like, oh, we're only doing stop motion or something, and you'll see this reaction against it. So all those tensions are going to be playing themselves out in the next, like I would say, 3 to 5 years in really
Hmm.
interesting ways. And I think that's, it's those tensions are what make creativity really spark. So I think we're at that
Yes.
moment.
Yeah. It feels like a fertile ground for creativity and even art starting to happen in interesting and different ways.
Yes. And then I would say within higher ed, I just finished teaching my first half semester in graduate school at SVA. And, I had 13 students and we worked, and we actively used AI. We used AI for ideation and ideas and for copywriting and for that kind of thing. And then we also used it to create visuals, right? And it was super, super fun, but it didn't co-opt the creative process. It was just an added ingredient.
Right. I think that's a critical point. And, something that you also kind of touched on is stuff that I've seen with my team also. Like the first sort of things that happen are just like, oh, Photoshop's got AI tools now that actually make things better and easier and some of that kind of stuff. So there's the experimental stuff that's on the fringe that's really fun to play with. And then there's also the stuff that's just becoming practical as it gets baked into your tools. And it's just kind of an extension of where you've been. You've talked before a little bit about how things like being able to talk to AI agents will shorten the distance from idea to artifact. And I'm wondering what you think that means for designers from a craft or skill standpoint, and also kind of thinking about those students. Like, is there a change in how things are being made? Is there a loss of skill or ability, or does it just change?
I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to craft. And so I think just as my view is like there's no real shortcuts when it comes to craft. And for me, can I see, well, I would say in the last 3 to 4 years, like mock-ups, templating, prototyping, all of those things are being supercharged with AI, right? So
Yeah.
being able to use Figma and then tell it to make stuff move and you don't actually have to do it, right? What's going to end up happening, it's just like any era of innovation. It's like I think the bar of good is going to get really, really high. Like you're going to get really fast, really good, really fast. But that I always call it like that 3% that makes something amazing. That's good taste and craft, right? And
Yeah.
so I've read a handful of articles over the last handful of weeks that it's like, the new IP, right? The new intellectual property is going to be your taste and your craft. And I would say that's always been true. What's going to happen is I think, let's just call it like the distance between the prototype and the real becomes really, really sliver thin.
Yeah.
And people are going to start to believe that like the full on prototype is the real thing. And I think
Yes.
what separates the prototype from the real thing is the craft, right? Is the taste. And it's also like the engineering complexity, it's like it's going to be crazy and things are changing rapidly, but I think good stuff rises to the surface. And then there'll be an accelerated subset of like AI fueled high fidelity averageness that we become
Yes.
like kind of okay with. It's sort of like watching Doritos commercials or Reese's Pieces commercials. It's like, oh, that's a commercial. I've seen that kind of thing before a million times. And like we somewhat dismiss it, but we recognize it, right? It's going to be similar to that, where you're going to have this whole AI especially within the creative arts, right? Within commercials and advertising and movies. It's sort of like CG, right? It's like, oh, it's another superhero movie. I can totally tell it's CG. And the human brain is just going to turn off at some level. So it's like, I think it's those moments where craft and your own sense of good taste and your own perspective and unique point of view are going to they'll always shine through.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I love what you said, and you touched on this a little bit earlier. The idea that curiosity is non-committal and demystification is the real goal. Could you expand a little bit on what you mean by that? And then also share how you coach that mindset.
Right. It's like, so I call it demystification, which is like making something that's like, oh, I don't know what this thing is at all. It's completely mysterious to me. And then, oh, now I get it. Like I might not be a master of it, but I'm not afraid of it. Right. And so
Yeah.
running a business, when you're a small business, it's like, if I didn't understand what QuickBooks was, like I couldn't understand if the finance was wrong. If I didn't really understand how 3D worked or traditional graphic design tools worked, I couldn't really evaluate whether that was good or not, right? And so I think demystification in general is very, very healthy. It's just a very healthy thing. And I think that this is the challenge that I think we all face, is the human brain is pattern based, right? So
Right.
once we get into the swing of something, our default mode network wants to go back to the thing we already did a million times because it's the comfort zone. And so when we think about demystification and when we think about learning new things, you have to really find that other part of your brain that's curious, right? And I'm going to get a little graduate school on you, but this is the one thing I learned, probably the most important thing I learned in graduate school at Cranbrook through the critique process was you put yourself in a voluntary state of crisis, right? And what that means is, in graduate school, you make a bunch of graphic design work, you put it up on the wall for your peers to judge, and then you're putting yourself out there, right? And it's like it's a similar mindset, right? It's like contained voluntary state of crisis. And what that means is get it to the point where you have no choice but to complete the task, right? Like I'll give you an example. A while back, I was like, I'm not going to write this proposal like I wrote it before. What I'm going to do is I'm going to feed the RFP and a previous proposal and a bunch of context into a GPT or something like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the entire exercise of achieving the same goal that I know how to do already, but I'm going to put myself in a voluntary state of crisis and see if I can achieve it in this new, completely foreign way. And so I think that is a good example that when I did that for the first time, I got maybe 15% of value. When I did it the second time, I got like 40% of value. By the time I did it like the fourth time, I got like 250% value, right?
Right.
And so it's when I was much younger man, the demystification phrase I always used is, I'm not going to let this thing get the best of me, right? And it's a little bit of that true. It's like your washer breaks and you, instead of going to buy a new one, you watch a YouTube video and struggle to understand it, right? I think there's just that muscle needs to be more primary in all that we do.
Is there a way to foster that with your team, or is that another cultural thing that you think you can bake into?
You make it I mean, the way I think, the way I do it is I make it a non-negotiable, right? So like when I was, for my graduate students, I was like, first day, how many people know motion? How many people have used AI? How many people are used AI motion tools, and like maybe one. Yeah. And I was like, by the end of this, we're all going to use it. And so we made it a deliberate thing. We were like, this is a must. And I think when you do that, when you make things a non-negotiable. So for example, when Alexa, our head of HR, and Jason Chenevikoff, our head of culture, is my business partner, they were like, we're doing a full AI day, right? We're taking the entire day off. We're not having any meetings. Everyone starts at 9:30 all day, and we're going to share out where we are at 6. Like, we just made it a non-negotiable. And that's kind of what you have to do, right? You have to leave space for people to do it. And I think if you're in an academic setting, or if you're in a business setting where patterns and hierarchy and business standard operating procedures are really, really like entrenched, that's the only way to do it.
Yeah. It feels like there's opportunity there for small agencies, smaller teams to be able to do some of that. I'm thinking back, there was a study that I saw a couple years ago. I was probably about 2 years ago exactly, about how people were using AI tools, even if their employer was not endorsing them. And some people were using them, for shortcuts, right? Like, I'm going to get this email done faster or whatever, just kind of like productivity things. But there's a big disconnect between a giant organization that has not embracing things and has people sneaking and using that kind of stuff versus like what you're talking about, where you're actually taking, a day or maybe even a day a week and doing something where you're really intentionally saying like, go learn and come back with cool new ideas and new, better ways to do things.
Yeah, well, I think it's just like anything evolutionary. I mean, within academics and within large organizations, this is just my observation,
Mhm.
is to turn to, large organizations, basically they're, I would call them like era-based decisioning, right? So it's like
Mhm.
it, as opposed to a small organization, which is organic-based decisioning, like, oh, that's not working, we'll do it this way. Oh, that's not working, we'll do it this way.
Yeah.
When you have a big organization, you have to make an institutional call that might involve infrastructure, standard operating
Right.
procedures, software infrastructure investment. And then what they do is those are implemented until they're obsolete and then they change again, right? So what you got to figure out how to do at the leadership level is you just got to figure out how to work within each of the organisms that you created, the business organisms, right? And again, not dissimilar to the software discussion where we're going to learn AI and the software we already own and use, right? It's the same. It's like, what are the behaviors within a large organization, academic or otherwise? Because that's the path of least resistance, right? It's like a place and then some kind of leadership mandate to get
Mhm.
people to adopt it, because the only alternative is to do it later. And my good friend Will Hall, who is great speaker and lecturer, he did a lecture about like the myths of innovation. And one of the big myths of innovation is like you have to be first. It's like you don't actually,
Mm.
you should not be first. You should be like
Right.
second or third.
Right. Early, but not first.
Right. You shouldn't be behind, but you shouldn't be like the leading edge. And I think within, you know, my teaching experience, I think this is the perfect time to start putting some stakes in the ground and building
Yeah.
some new behaviors. And to your point, it's one of many behaviors. It's like we're human beings and we're only as good as the individuals we work with. And there's going to be just different sensibilities that adopt different tools at different altitudes, right? I think a misunderstanding is everybody needs to be a master of all these things. And I don't think that's true. I think they're going to be, I think AI workflows and like how AI augments our entire workflows is going to change our lives fundamentally in the next half decade.
Yeah.
It's no question. From like how cards are built, on and on and on. When it comes to the messy business of teaching, I mean, I can tell you, if I wasn't in the classroom for 3 straight hours and sat with each person individually, one on one, it wouldn't have been as good of a class, right? So
Yeah.
I think there is IRL behaviors that are, non-technological, that are still like so foundational for us to learn and to build a culture, like, doing things together, learning, to having a workshop, making a mistake, talking about the mistakes. Those behaviors are what's going to get people to sort of collectively learn,
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. Well, Matt, I can't close out a conversation with you without asking you about what you have termed rebel optimism, because I feel like we can all use some of that. So, could you talk a little bit about what rebel optimism looks like in practice and how you keep it going?
Yeah, I mean, I did not. That is not a term I coined. I totally stole it.
Okay.
I read an article last year by an author on Medium, Jay Westenberg, and fantastic article, and I think she called it like "fu optimism" originally, and and I think her framing was exactly right, which is like when you're in these moments of uncertainty, it's like, well, what's the sensibility? What's the sort of overarching sensibility that's going to get you through it in the most productive way? And I think when I read her article, I read the words rebel optimism. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is something that everyone that works within an organization and is recognizing that, sociopolitically, technologically, like we're at this new moment, right? We're at this
Yeah.
foundationally new moment that's really messy, right? It's like electrification, right? And I think for me, rebel optimism as an idea, it's the two words are really, really important. I think rebel becomes an avatar for despite it all, right? Despite it all, I'm going to do this, right? And I think, having grown up in skateboarding and punk rock and having put out records and ran galleries and done all kinds of stuff as in my 20s and 30s, like if I didn't have a rebel spirit, I would never have jumped into the unknown. And so I think the rebel aspect of it it's crucial to find the uniqueness. And then optimism is like, do it in a positive way, right? It's like, we're going to put ourselves in a voluntary state of crisis. We're going to invest time and money and intellectual and creative energy to get to a new place that's unknown to us. The only way to do that is to be excited by it, right?
Yeah.
Not to be discouraged by it. And so I think for me, when I talk to students, I've talked to, because of a visible distance and because of my book that has a lot of lessons, I'm meeting with students, and students are like, they're worried. Like, can I get a job? How's AI going to impact the creative services industry? I'm like, rebel optimism. It's like, be excited about what's in front of you. And that excitement and that energy is going to rub off on whoever you talk to, right? And so if you're excited about AI and you've jumped into this, that, and the other thing, and your portfolio is great, and you go on a job interview and you're excited about it and you have rebel optimism, that's going to shine. That's going to be different. That's going to matter. Right. But conversely, being super worried and not sure or all those things, like that's not going to get you where you want to be. Right. And I'm not saying I have the right idea at all. And I of course don't know where all this is heading as much as anyone else, but I know that mindset is going to get you to a better outcome ultimately.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's inspiring and also really practical, and something that I've experienced too. It feels like when the going gets tough, it's even more important to be creative and to push forward. So.
And for educators, I think both my parents were teachers. Both of them had PhDs, both taught at the college level. My brother as well. And for me, my first day of class, what I tell everyone is like, it's like, I'm Matt Owens, and right here, I'm your biggest fan. Like, I am here to make this exciting and super fun. And I'm here for you to go, like, in 15 weeks or whatever it was, be like, you're going to come out of this change for the better, and not change radically, but change enough that you're going to have a new tool, right? A new mindset. And the best thing that's ever happened to me is, after class, I get an email from some student that says like, that was the funnest class I ever, ever had, or I learned so much. I so totally appreciate it, because I think what happens in life, that if you're a student or if you're an educator, it's like change happens brick by brick, moment by moment. It's a cumulative effect, right? And that's the same for independent business practice, right? It's a cumulative effect. Every little moment matters. And I think now more than ever, rebel optimism specifically, and just a sensitivity to all those moments. It just makes you a better person. It makes you more self-aware. It makes you have a lot more empathy for the people around you. And it makes you want to bring everyone along for the ride when things are exciting, and not to get discouraged.
I love that so much. Well, Matt, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. If listeners would like to connect with you and learn more about you or athletics, where should they find you?
You can check out athletics at athleticsnyc.com, and you can get a hold of me at mattowens.com.
Awesome. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of Control Plus Create. Big thanks to Matt Owens again for sharing fresh ways to co-create with AI. We'd love to hear what you're doing to demystify AI for your team, how you hold on to your rebel optimism, or any other big takeaways you have from this episode. So let's keep the conversation going on LinkedIn. I'm Dave Hunt. I'll catch you next time.
The Higher Ed Pulse is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, And we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our show helps higher ed marketers and admission pros find their next big idea and features a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Brian Gross, Eddie Francis, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.